So just out of curiosity, I was going through IMDb's Bottom 100 the other day, which is their list of the 100 lowest rated films of all time according to audience reviews. And there's some absolute f***ing heaters on this roster, a lot of cinema worth dissecting. But I personally was drawn to the 7th lowest rated film of all time, a little video game IP movie from 2003 called House of the Dead, directed by the legitimately unstable Uwe Boll.
Like, you fuckers writing about my movies constantly lies. They think Elektra is better as Blood Rain or Catwoman. They are retards. They have no idea. And if you go now on IMDb and you see that this movie is getting more points on IMDb, this is a bad sign for that IMDb voting system. So I wrote like, okay, if you come up here and you fight me, then I will kick the shit out of you.
A director who was kind of well known for making pretty rough video game movies in the early 2000s. He actually makes 3 more appearances in the bottom 100 with Alone in the Dark, Far Cry, and In the Name of the King, which is based on the Dungeon Siege games. But I was excited to see House of the Dead in such a prestigious spot here because I actually have this minor dose of nostalgia for the movie. I watched it probably right around the time it got its DVD release 20 years ago. For context, I was in kindergarten at the time, and I didn't really remember anything about it outside of this absolutely fantastic outfit worn by the character aptly named Liberty. This was the coolest fucking fit that kindergarten me had ever seen, and it's still definitely in the conversation. But we're not here to talk about patriotic clothing. We're here to do a play-by-play and find out if House of the Dead truly is the worst zombie movie ever made, like 39,000 reviewers and a 3% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes would have you believe. Please bear in mind, I did not go to film school, so if you're looking for highbrow commentary, I'm probably not your guy. Now, as the movie opens, we get hit with some absolutely demented early 2000s techno laid over a little seizure bait in the intro credits. I'll be honest, it goes weirdly hard. Then we get a narration from Rudy, seemingly a lone survivor, lamenting the tragedy that's unfolded around him and explaining who the main cast are in the least organic fashion that he possibly can. Pretty awkward, nonsensical dialogue and wooden performances are going to be kind of a running theme here, to the extent that on the small number of occasions where an interaction feels natural and is acted out convincingly, it actually takes me out of the movie a little bit. Anyway, our cast are Greg, who Rudy describes as goofy but a good guy; Simon, who he just met a few hours ago, he describes as handsome but stupid; Cynthia is eye candy and nothing more, apparently; Karma wants to be Foxy Brown, he says, which is such a fucking left field reference that I'm more curious about Rudy's mind than anything. Also, it's worth keeping in mind that these fucking people are dead, recently so, as he's talking, and he's sitting here shitting on them for no real reason. This is really who I'm meant to empathize with. Anyway, the final member of the gang is Alicia, Rudy's ex, and they broke up so she could focus on her fencing. Like the sword kind. And yes, that's very silly, but I think we have found Chekhov's gun. Keep this in mind, I'm sure it will be relevant later. Now, the list of meat balloons that Rudy just listed off are on their way to an island rave off the coast of Seattle. A rave that Rudy is already at, and a rave that happens to be sponsored by Sega. Because who the fuck cares? The team need to enlist the services of a local fishing boat to take them out there, which is where they run into Salish and Captain Kirk. Kirk lets the kids know that the island is called the Island of the Dead because of evil spirits or something. He and Simon haggle on the price, then they're ready to set out. Greg tries to verify that the captain's name is Captain Kirk, because that's silly, at which point Kirk randomly threatens to stab him over it, instead of just saying, "Yes, that's my name." I have to imagine Uwe thought this was cool, I don't really know. Also, Kirk's boat is being pursued by the boat FBI because they suspect he's a smuggler, which he is. Now the movie starts cutting back and forth a little bit between the gang traveling on the boat and a scene with two 20-somethings on the island, so we'll break down the latter first. They're horny ravers who decide to break away from the pack and go skinny dipping. The girl strips down and gets in, but the guy decides the water is too cold, so he lays down on the beach and just watches her tread water like a fucking psychopath, I guess. Before long, something apparently immaterial tries to suck the girl underwater, so she makes a move back towards the beach. And honestly, the underwater shots in this movie constitute some of Uwe's best cinematography. It's not exactly a high bar, but credit where it's due. Obviously, the chick has no top on at the moment, and I like having a YouTube channel, so I can't show you these ones. Anyway, in the brief stretch of time that the girl was in the ghost vortex, Boy Toy has managed to go missing from the beach. She gets dressed, meanders into the woods to find him, and enters what I think we can consider the titular House of the Dead. And we get this fun little practical effect of a hand jutting up through Boy Toy's stomach before some decrepit-looking zombies snatch up the girl. Now back on the boat, Greg is feeling a little seasick, so we get a scene of him throwing up on Cynthia's chest and face. And her reaction is so jarring to me. She's like 20% grossed out, 80% laughing like it's the funniest shit that's ever happened. Either they're so deeply in love that actual vomit in her mouth is no biggie, or this take was entirely scuffed and Uwe just decided a second try wasn't worth it. I think this scene really is just the justification for having Cynthia topless a few seconds later, so I'm not going to think about it too hard. Salish decides to give Cynthia a cross necklace to ward off evil spirits on the island, and Cynthia responds by calling him Gandalf. Classic Cynthia. Then, in a blink and you'll miss it cut, we see another horny couple on the island beset by the undead, just before the gang makes landfall. Kirk and Salish start unloading their smuggled goods, and the gang heads toward the rave, while we see zombies watching them all from the trees. And if I haven't mentioned it yet, Uwe uses footage from the 1996 House of the Dead game for transitions. I have absolutely nothing to say about that creative choice, I just thought you should know. The gang finds that the rave has been completely abandoned, and because Alicia is the cool and smart girl boss of the group, she's the only one who acts concerned about it. Cut to Salish being killed by zombies. Cut back to the gang, and Greg and Cynthia are making everyone uncomfortable with their horniness, so they decide to go look for the hundreds of missing people and leave them to it. Greg spits some pretty crazy game, then realizes he has to take a leak, so he leaves Cynthia in their tent. She gets snatched by zombies. And I think it's worth noting that at this point, Boy Toy getting reached through has been the only death that isn't an off-screen cutaway kill, which is kind of disappointing. But back to the other three, they've wandered through the woods for a while, and Alicia is continuing to establish herself as the cool, smart one by belittling Simon.
Why don't you just stick to playing with yourself for now, Simon? By the way, what's with that stupid accent?
Looks like it was built a millennia ago.
Simon, it's centuries.
Oh, shut the fuck up, Alicia. Maybe millennia is what he meant. Maybe he meant it looks 1,000 years old. Is it okay if Simon has some thoughts that are different from yours, you absolute fucking nag? Anyway, they stumble upon the House of the Dead and make their way in to find Camera Guy, Rudy, and best character in the movie, Liberty. They explain what we already have a pretty good grasp on: zombies attacked the rave. Rudy and Camera Guy act weirdly hostile towards everyone, but eventually they formulate a plan to go collect Greg and Cynthia and get back on the boat. They find Greg trapped in a porta-john, classic Greg, then start searching for Cynthia. Zombie Cynthia emerges and breaks Camera Guy's neck before the lady from the boat FBI shows up and puts her down. Her name's Casper, if anyone's wondering. She's part of the team now. Cut to Kirk's boat being attacked by water zombies, and Kirk utilizing the infinite ammo power-up to blast them all away. This scene kinda rocks. The gang starts being chased on their way to the boat, and once they reach the beach, they don't get a response from Kirk, so Simon does a beautiful dive into the sea to swim out and investigate, not realizing that the boat and the water are full of zombies. Casper is spitting lead like crazy, trying to keep the zombies off him, and like the absolute fucking badass that she is, Liberty just starts wading into the ocean with a knife to save him. She does some cool underwater knife karate to one of them, but is getting snatched up by the second, when Kirk reveals that he's alive and armed, and we get a pretty decent practical effect explosion of this zombie's head. All told, the gang survived the attack with no fatalities, but Kirk gets bit and Simon gets his face burned up by zombie vomit. Then it's time for an exposition flashback, showing why the island is so scuffed. Turns out a Spanish priest decided he was God a few centuries ago, killed a ship crew, landed here, and started doing voodoo experiments on the locals. Cut forward to Casper forcing Greg to accompany her on a trek back to her FBI boat, since Kirk's boat is still swarming with zombies. And I know I'm taking this movie way too seriously as is, but the complete negligence of this woman fucks me up a little bit. She forces a hesitant Greg to accompany her and watch her back on the way to the boat, and that's fine. But then, at the first sign of an attack, she tells him to run away while she stands there and shoots. He doesn't even know where the fuck to go. Why would you bring him if your plan at first contact was to separate anyway? So unsurprisingly, Greg gets swarmed and dies, and we see what we can assume is the priest zombie cheesing from the bushes. And this reminds me of something. I don't know if this guy is meant to be the zombie from the film's promotional image. It kind of looks like not, actually, but I have some thoughts all the same. So this would be the image that greets you whenever you find this movie on a streaming platform, and that would have been hung in theaters back in 2003. And there's a lot about it that I kind of like. The tagline is punchy and to the point, and this spooky guy looking through the keyhole is kind of menacing at a glance. I'd wager he probably does a decent job at piquing viewer interest. But then you go, the fuck is wrong with his eye? And you realize that for no good reason, they just very crudely photoshopped the Black Label Society skull, not even properly centered into his eye socket, on the official promotional image. And it looks terrible and kind of ruins the entire picture when they did everything else perfectly well. And no, this isn't a microcosm for the entire film or anything, it's just something that amuses me. Anyway, back to the movie. Casper returns to the gang and lets them know that her boat has been destroyed and that Greg is probably dead. Simon criticizes her for being so goddamn stupid that she can't even verify that pretty important detail, but everyone just kinda acts like he's the asshole. Side note, I'm really struggling to see Simon as the bumbling idiot that the script seems to want him to be. He's been pretty level-headed and resourceful throughout the movie, as much as any of these cartoon characters can be anyway. If anything, it's the characters that are supposed to be competent leaders that act like troglodytes, and the supporting cast that seems somewhat reasonable. Anyway, Kirk pops open a smuggler stash and gets everyone armed with some new firepower, and the gang decide they need to return to the House of the Dead and just see what happens next. And the next 8 straight minutes is devoted to one of the most over-the-top action sequences in zombie movie history. It's got everything. Bad rap rock soundtrack, B-movie practical effects, slow motion, explosions, parkouring zombies, whatever the fuck this is. And Uwe does this cute thing where every character gets their little montage and they're styled like a character select screen. It's ridiculous. This sequence rocks. Unfortunately, Best Character Liberty does get snatched up along the way, and Casper gets her legs hacked off while she's crawling through a window. She is unable to power through that one. And Rudy is weirdly beat up about Casper's death, considering he's had no emotional reaction to the deaths of several other people that he should theoretically care about more, but whatever, let the man feel his feelings, I guess. Everyone else manages to make it inside and barricade the doors, with Kirk sustaining a few more bites on the leg. And now the crew gets a little downtime. Simon and Karma awkwardly make out to relieve some stress, while Rudy and Alicia tend to Kirk's wounds, then argue, then awkwardly make out to relieve some stress. We need something else to happen. This is getting kind of rough. Before long, the gang decide they need to explore the rest of the house, and they stumble into a little laboratory with some old corpses laying around. Rudy does some science and reveals to us that what is happening to the zombies is not natural. No fucking shit. Cut back to Kirk, whose health is declining pretty rapidly at this point. He thinks he hears his old mate Salish whistling outside, so it's time for the heroic sacrifice. He puts Salish down, lights a stick of dynamite, and takes a few of the zombies with him as he goes up. Back in the lab, there's a zombie fish swimming in some red liquid, and because we needed something stupid to happen, Karma shoots the fish through the glass, shattering the tank and pouring the liquid all over the corpses in the room, which reanimates them. That was really dumb. I'm surprised they didn't make Simon do that. Anyway, they retreat into the next room where a stash of gunpowder is kept, and they find a cellar hatch. Simon starts getting playfully hugged by a zombie that just reached through a window, so he decides it's time for his heroic sacrifice, and everyone else flees down the hatch while he blows up the entire house and presumably takes a few zombies with him. The remaining 3 find themselves in some underground tunnels, and Rudy uses his big brain to determine that one of the tunnels must lead to the beach, so they get moving. Some moss-covered zombies start coming out of the walls, which is honestly pretty cool. I dig the costume design on that one. And it's time for the 3rd heroic sacrifice in a row, as Karma decides to hold them off by running into the middle of the pack and doing some karate moves before getting swarmed. I don't think Uwe really understands that these things lose their emotional impact the more frequent and stupid that they are, but whatever, we gotta keep this thing moving. A hooded swordsman saves Alicia and Rudy and is revealed to be none other than actually likable character Greg. He guides them to another weird experiment room before it's revealed that it isn't Greg at all. It's Priest Zombie wearing a very convincing Greg mask. And our heroes are captured by conquistador zombies. Rudy and Priest Zombie have a particularly poorly written exchange of words.
I'm glad we found the balance on the creature. You created it all so you could be immortal. Why?
Before we get another exposition flashback, Rudy is able to fight off the zombies holding him down because he's cool and strong. Alicia grabs a sword and stabs the priest, and they loot a grenade from Greg's corpse and blow the entire dungeon away while making their escape. Celebrations are short-lived, however, as it's time for the zombie sword fight. Rudy gets bitched down pretty quickly, and it's time for Alicia to save the day. Because she's really good at fencing, remember? I still just can't believe they had the foresight to set this scene up in like the first minute of the movie. Priest does ultimately get the upper hand and stab her right in the sternum though, which allows Rudy to decide to get up and pull off a quick beheading. And that leads to this kind of fun sequence where the priest's headless body starts choking Rudy out, and Alicia has to get back up and smash the head before she falls over dead. Cut to a rescue helicopter landing on the island, and Rudy emerges from the dungeon with a now barely alive Alicia. He acts weirdly hostile towards the rescue team before revealing that his last name is Curian, which is the last name of the main antagonist from the games. Do with that information what you will. And in Rudy's closing monologue, he reveals that he's performed some kind of experiment to bring Alicia back to life, likely just dosing her with some of the special red liquid down there. Meaning he's probably about to start a zombie apocalypse on the mainland. Cut to credits, rap rock soundtrack. And that is House of the Dead. I'm not going to mince words, it's not a very good movie. Worst zombie movie of all time though? The 8-minute zombie killing montage alone elevates it above some of the other schlock I've seen. And while a lot of the costumes do look pretty low budget, there's some honest craftsmanship and creativity going on there. Likewise, 7th worst movie ever? It's not even the 7th worst movie I've personally seen. The people reviewing this clearly did not grow up watching straight-to-TV horror movies with their Sci-Fi Channel dads. If I had to guess, the thing that makes this bad movie so poorly reviewed is probably the fact that it had a high-profile theatrical release, meaning that way more people with much higher expectations ended up seeing it, and they ended up getting quality that would be mid-tier amongst the made-for-TV market. Anyway, are there any other movies or games you think we should take a look at? Please feel free to let me know. I'll talk to you guys later.